Hollow Knight Silksong is a game about many things, but there is perhaps no theme as prevalent across all three acts of the story as motherhood, which becomes abundantly clear when you stop to count just how many mother figures Hornet encounters during her journey through Pharloom. The game's very first boss is the Moss Mother of Moss Grotto, who fiercely defends both her eggs and her fuzzy, newly hatched offspring that can be seen fluttering in the background. In Greymoor's underbelly, you'll encounter terrifying Mite Mothers stalking long-forgotten tunnels, ever seeking for prey alongside their younger kin. From the couriers in Bellheart, you'll receive a fragile egg that, when delivered to Styx, hatches into a Silk-Eater queen that continually gives birth to tiny silk-eating larvae. Residing high above the kingdom in the putrefied ducts is Huntress, caring for a large brood of eggs and prepared to feed the ravenous babies inside them with her own shell if necessary. When Hornet finds Chakra at Trail's End, the hunter reveals the true nature of her relationship with her late master. She was just as much a mother to Chakra, more by far than the bug who physically bore her. Additionally, at the beginning of Act 3, the Bell Beast becomes a mother, fiercely protecting their young from the newly awoken Bell Eater and teaching them how to navigate the kingdom's extensive bell veins. Other mothers and mother figures include the Fly Broodmother, mad matriarch of the Fly caste whose children are born into perpetual servitude and filth, both jailers and prisoners of the giant slab complex. Nylith, mother of Shellwood, the first seed of the forest whose heart remains connected to all its living things and ever seeks to maintain the careful balance between them. Scarsinger Carmelita, queen of the great ants who dwell in Pharloom's lush eastern fields, who in an age-long past united the disparate tribes there through her strength and her song. Even the 12th Architect, though only a construct of silk and steel themselves, can be seen as a mother of sorts in that they are the last creator of the gleaming automatons who toil within the cogworks. But of course, most important of all is Hornet's Weaver ancestry, a long and troubled line of mothers and daughters alike, all trapped in a cycle of abuse and exploitation that haunts their every step. At its core, the story of Silksong is one of Hornet reckoning with her lineage. The final boss of Pharloom is literally her grandmother, and depending on the circumstances in which this fight takes place, she either perpetuates the cycle of abuse into a new generation, or breaks it instead, clearing the way for a brighter future. But that's getting ahead of ourselves a bit. In this video, I want to start at the beginning and examine the full story of Silksong through the lens of motherhood, exploring how themes of love, resentment, sacrifice, loyalty, and betrayal are represented in the Weaver's history before breaking down the eternally conflicted nature of Grandmother Silk herself. One quick note before diving in, though. I want to acknowledge that fathers and father figures are represented in Silksong as well, with notable examples being the Crawfather, Father of the Flame, Crust King Khan, and the Clover Dancers of Verdania, not to mention the presence of important father-daughter relationships like we see with Gilly. In truth, many of the topics I'll be discussing here apply to fatherhood as well as motherhood, but I chose to focus on the maternal side since that is where the story places most of its attention. In the beginning, there was Silk, and Silk desired to become a mother, aching for it in the luminous depths of her soul. But, either unable or unwilling to conceive biologically, this primordial being instead cast her gaze on the simple bugs dwelling in the lands below, selecting a group of small, unremarkable arachnids known as Pharlids on whom to bestow her blessing. She pierced their shells with divine thread, elevating them, expanding their bodies, minds, and souls, creating a new caste of bug with remarkable strength and intelligence: the Weavers. She called them her daughters, she called them divine, and she asked them to serve, demanding both the silk of their shells and the song of their souls, played out unceasingly upon delicate rune harps. To Mother Silk, the arrangement was perfect: eternal worship in exchange for eternal light. But before long, its one-sided nature began to wear her children thin. The Weavers were given so much, but allowed to do so little, bound as they were to eternal service, and in time began to resent she who had created them. So desperately did they wish to be free that, unbeknownst to Mother Silk, they changed their tune ever so slightly, wielding it as a lullaby and singing her into a deep, dreamless sleep. What follows is the recorded history of the kingdom called Pharloom. Masquerading as gods themselves, the Weavers came to be worshipped by common bugs who believed them to be benevolent creatures of healing, wisdom, and light. The inscriptions found on various weaver effigies certainly paint a rosy picture of their reign as empathetic rulers who cared for even the lowest of bugs, though it is unclear how true this actually was. Based on plenty of other evidence, this may have been nothing more than propaganda. Either way, establishing such a favorable reputation was important, for the weavers needed to ensure their mother stayed asleep indefinitely, and they had just the idea in mind. Using their exceptional skill with tools, these daughters built a great structure directly below the place where Mother Silk slumbered, the Citadel of Song, its empty chambers soon to be filled. As we learn from multiple sources, the weavers whispered sweet promises to bugs all throughout the land, from the windswept nameless town above to the ironclad halls of Forgeholm, inviting them to take part in a holy pilgrimage to the kingdom's heart and join a great choir there, raising their voices forever and ever to obtain a sure salvation. Of course, it was all nothing more than an elaborate lie, a way for the weavers to perpetuate the lullaby they had begun by offloading some of the work to the kingdom's lower bugs. Day after day, these unwitting pilgrims prayed a cage for Mother Silk, singing her chains tighter with every psalm and cementing the false rule of her smug daughters. And all the while, the weavers secretly harvested their mother's fine silk, spreading it on a massive loom in the cavern above, perhaps drawing upon it to increase their power and influence and maintain their pretense of divinity. This is where I think the name Pharloom originated, or rather what it harkens back to. A cast of ascended Pharlids working the shimmering loom of their sleeping god. By every measure, it seemed that the weavers had triumphed, finally coming out on top, yet their hold on this kingdom was much more tenuous than they pretended it to be. For one thing, they faced significant challenges from within. Somehow, she whom we know only as the first sinner discovered the weaver's Pharlid origin, perhaps by unlocking a deeply sealed memory within herself, and was enraged by this revelation. They were never the biological children of Mother Silk, but instead adopted creations, cursed with silk they had not wanted nor asked for, and forever subject to a pale being because of it. Though what happened next is subject to debate, it is possible that she turned against her sisters, trying to expose them all for the frauds she now knew them to be, an endeavor that had her branded with the sin of apostasy and locked away deep in the slab prison, never to be freed or absolved. This incident must have rattled the weavers greatly, sowing pernicious seeds of doubt within their ranks, but the fallout of such infighting paled in comparison to their bigger problem. Even with the assistance of the Citadel's newly established choir, they still bore much of the responsibility for sustaining Mother Silk's lullaby themselves. They remained ever trapped in the accursed web of their foundation, and try as they might, the weavers could never rid themselves of the worry that she would someday reawaken and snatch away everything they had worked so hard to build. It nagged at them, night after night, a quiet torment that eventually became unbearable. In an effort to resolve the matter permanently, and knowing all too well the limits of their own power, these rebellious daughters sought to become mothers themselves, to produce an heir that might be strong enough to challenge and dethrone even a god. But this was much easier said than done. Conceiving children was a painful, near impossible task for their kind, perhaps as a result of their significantly enlarged masks. And so, instead, far below the citadel in Weave Nest Atla, where they were certain Mother Silk would not be able to sense them, the weavers extracted pure silk from their shells and cast upon it their will to fabricate life, producing a daughter of sorts whom they named Ava. She was a strange, ephemeral sort of being, with thoughts that mimicked a weaver's but senses that were wholly unique. Lacking traditional sight, she instead perceived the world through soul, peering into the very natures of those around her. It was an impressive skill far beyond ordinary bugs, but it also isolated her from her mothers and came at all too high a cost. She was too fragile to ever leave the iron shell of her creation. Ultimately, Ava was deemed a failure. She evidently did not possess the raw power her mothers had wanted and was considered nothing more than a wish-cast vain, divinity mimicked in form too frail. Merely by existing, Ava failed to live up to their impossibly high expectations, and they despised her for it. Thinking all that work wasted, and perhaps more than a little ashamed of their own hubris, the weavers sealed Ava away in the deepest part of the weave nest, no longer wishing to see their guilty faces reflected in the glass of her iron prison. Of course, the great irony here is that the weavers would make a daughter only for themselves, only to exploit her abilities and keep her trapped, just as their mother had done with them. Did they ever stop to consider what Ava wanted? In the aftermath of this failure, the weavers branched out into other areas of research, still seeking a means to claim their freedom once and for all. Those who remained in Weave Nest Atla worked on a special snare device designed to bind even a god, while others in Weave Nest Merglin put their faith in tools over silk entirely, worried that their power would eventually fade and crafting powerful weapons to use when that time came. Others delved even deeper, establishing Weave Nest Absalom in the Abyss and briefly turning their attention to the Void itself, perhaps thinking to harness its dark and terrible power. But despite making considerable progress in many of these areas, in the end, none of the Weavers' plans came to fruition. As a last resort, it was decided that they had no choice but to run, to leave the kingdom and venture out into the wasteland beyond, seeking a future far away from their ancestral home. Before doing this, however, they had to plan for contingencies. A small number of weavers chose to remain in Pharloom, binding themselves in great spires throughout the land that served as both vessels and tombs. Though their shells might crumble into dust, their power and memory would be preserved, ready and waiting in the event that one might come of silken strength enough to weave them free and reclaim the future of their haunted kingdom. Not a prophecy necessarily, but rather a hope that one day their descendants would return to this place that would forever be their home. Next, it was time to finally free themselves of the Citadel's lullaby, to pass the burden on to the simple bugs of this land in full, never to cease and never to silence. Full responsibility over the choir and its song was transferred to the naive conductors, who greedily claimed the mantle of rule without yet understanding the cost, and then, with heavy hearts, the fading first children said their goodbyes. Nearly the entire population of Pharloom's weavers fled, scattering in all directions, a great diaspora fueled by the simple yet overwhelming desire to get as far away from their mother as possible and escape at last her silken sight. Now, interestingly, despite the terrible pain and difficulty of bearing children that had always been a part of their nature, many of these weavers wished to take the risk anyways, aching for the experience of motherhood, and in time began to multiply in their respective lands. One such weaver was Hera, who settled on the outskirts of a kingdom known as Hallownest. This land had its own problems, of course. Two pale beings locked in a terrible escalating conflict with one another, but as a result, a great opportunity presented itself. As part of his grand plan to seal the Radiance and her awful infection away in the Black Egg Temple, the Pale King sought out powerful individuals who could become dreamers, and Hera, now Queen of Deepnest, agreed to make this sacrifice on one condition: that the Pale King would first give her a child. He accepted these terms, and only a short time later, Hornet was born, a miraculous and, frankly, adorable child, both spider and worm. But we'll come back to her later. We now return to the kingdom of Pharloom and the great citadel at its crown, which had undergone massive changes in the years following the Weaver's departure. What had once been a plain structure of bare, unadorned stone in which all bugs lived as equals was now a gleaming palace gilded with gold, brimming with excess, and rife with social inequality. Though most of its inhabitants remained pilgrims, in some form or another, these were now filtered into a rigid class system that saw a lucky few permitted to the choral chambers, free to enjoy a life of song, fine dining, and splishy splashing in the holy bathhouse, while everyone else was relegated to the underworks, slaving away in soot and grime simply to keep the place running. From the very start, the Citadel had been designed as a system of exploitation, but under the long stewardship of the conductors, it had become so much worse. These false kings reveled in their absolute authority, building up the seat of their power and amassing vast riches, but above all else they were motivated by fear, for they alone knew the truth of this kingdom's foundation. They knew all too well what would happen if their voices faltered, and so, seeking to strengthen the holy choir in any way they could, their first order of business was to eliminate the greatest liability of all: death itself. While song must be sung, none may falter, it was decreed. Infirmity, sickness, death, all are banished from our citadel. Early on, those who disobeyed this order were sentenced to torture and death in the slab, a warning to all others, but in time the conductors devised a more enduring solution. In the dark, shadowy halls of the White Ward, teams of surgeons began to forcibly inject bugs with silk harvested from the frayed loom of their sleeping god, greatly extending the lifespans of those who survived the process. It did not matter to them that the procedure was irreversible, that the silk would be passed to their children and their children's children until every shell was seeded with thread. All that mattered was the song. But this had been a grave miscalculation. At some point, for reasons not entirely clear, Grandmother Silk began to stir within her sleep, recovering some degree of awareness. My best guess is that she regained her innate world sense that the Weavers had tried to emulate with the Farsight tool, and in assessing the state of the world, quickly realized what her traitorous daughters had done to her. Reeling in the agony of this betrayal, she lashed out, sending forth tendrils of silk to seize control of the bugs residing both in the Citadel and in the lands far below. It was all too easy. She simply had to seek out the silk already in their bodies. The touch of cursed thread came to be known in Pharloom as the Haunting, and though some remained unscathed, few knew its source and none could hope to stop it. Practically overnight, the entire kingdom had become a stage occupied by puppets, and Grandmother Silk was the puppeteer, pulling their strings from her web at the top. And though she could have surely used this power to destroy the citadel that caged her, she instead allowed its operations to continue unhindered, for with its song now diminished, she saw a new use for the place. Every pilgrim drawn into the web was a new puppet, and a new source of silk. At this point, Grandmother Silk made a curious decision. Even after all that had happened with the Weavers, the bitterness of their betrayal still fresh in her mind, she chose to make new children. Though instead of elevating common bugs as she had done before, this time she spun them directly out of herself, dreaming them into existence by projecting her wish and will upon divine thread. Not all too different from what the Weavers had attempted with Ava. Details regarding this period are scant, but as far as I can tell, this new creation process took place within the exhaust organ and in caverns just west of the structure, and appeared to require a great deal of trial and error for Grandmother Silk to get right. At the time Hornet is brought to Pharloom, the area is enshrouded in a thick, disorienting mist, likely composed of countless tiny particles of soul, and inhabited by ghostly wraiths that Hornet describes in the Hunter's Journal as anguished specters of lingering thread. Forever they wander these mists, empty and alone, seeking only to steal the silk-laden souls of any travelers unfortunate enough to get lost in the forsaken place. Like the Abyss in Hallownest, the Mist of Pharloom is a graveyard of failed children, and just as one of the vessels succeeded in escaping that great pit, so too one of these wraiths eventually rose above the rest, Phantom. In contrast to the Hollow Knight, though, who was rigorously trained by its parental figures after being chosen, Phantom appears to have been quickly forgotten about. At no point does Grandmother Silk mention the child. But why? I think the answer is twofold and can be found in their physical appearance. First, Phantom is old, their white silk turned gray and stiff, suggesting some degree of growth, and more importantly, they are found in possession of a mask. Even cracked as it is, Phantom is deeply attached to the item, holding it tightly to their face with one claw during the battle with Hornet. According to Maskmaker, there is no greater gift than a mask, for a face is necessary to be, to exist, and to die. It is the essential thing. I think the implication here is that Phantom had formed their own identity, a profound sense of self that Grandmother Silk saw as a liability. Despite the fact that she had created all the wraiths with a built-in dependency on her, requiring a steady stream of her divine thread to live, Phantom had become too independent and therefore too risky. Why invest any more time and energy into a child that might turn on her like the Weavers had? Instead, she decided to sever Phantom from her silk entirely and tasked them with running the exhaust organ, forever expelling waste from the Citadel into bile water, their fate to eventually fade away and die. A child forgotten and alone, just as Ava had been. I think this parallel between the two characters is actually quite important. Repeatedly, we see how similar the Weavers are to their mother, despite hating her, and the way that both of them treat their children reveals how skewed their concept of motherhood really is. They don't want just any child, they want a perfect one, and refuse to settle for anything less. Just as the Weavers abandoned Ava only to dote on Hornet, Grandmother Silk cut her ties with Phantom to spin a new child into being. And this time, she was determined to get it right. Her dream dialogue from Lace's Silkheart says it all. Better a child spun mad than none. Better a child spun frail than none. Better a child spun pure than them. And from our silk, a child born loyal. Lace was crafted to forever be a child, both in body and mind, closely resembling her mother with no mask to hide behind and no opportunity for growth. So desperately did Grandmother Silk wish for a child without needs, who would demand nothing but give everything, that she didn't even care if this unnatural design broke her. As far as she was concerned, a weak, stunted, and psychotic daughter was better than any weaver. And she loved her. In truth, she had loved all of her children, at least in her own twisted way, but therein lies the problem. Grandmother Silk's love is genuine but toxic, for it is conditional and self-serving, always a matter of what her children are able to offer her. She loves them inasmuch as they are able to further exalt her, but simply cannot be bothered to spare a thought for their wants or needs at all, hence the creation of Lace, and is certainly not willing to sacrifice anything for them. This complete lack of understanding and empathy is precisely why the Weavers rebelled in the first place, all of them siding against their mother and devising the great citadel with which to cage her. Or at least, all but one. Widow is one of only 2 weavers that Hornet directly engages with on her journey through Pharloom, and provides an interesting comparison with Lace. Based on her dialogue, it appears that she remained in the land when her sisters fled, and, unlike those who bound themselves in spires, she also remained loyal to their mother, referring to herself as the last of the first. But unlike the first sinner, who is regal, elegant, and powerful, fueled by rage and weaving it into blazing runes that became a symbol of the weaver's power, Widow is pathetic and pitiable, stunted not only by the heavy pins lodged in her spine, but by her unflagging devotion to a god that barely even notices her, groveling in the dirt like any common bug and squandering the potential of her divine nature. She is, unlike Lace, a child who chooses not to grow at all and pays a heavy price for that choice. Nevertheless, this is the kind of behavior Grandmother Silk wanted and expected from those who had received her blessing. In her mind, any gift given must be returned tenfold, and so, if her first children would not give of their silk willingly, then she would take it by force. Even in slumber, she could sense the faint traces of silk in those weavers who had fled abroad into the greater world, as well as in their offspring, her grandchildren. Quarter-part weavers, eighth-part weavers, all now doomed by the sins of their mothers in an age long past, a grim testament that the cycle of abuse cannot be escaped, only confronted. With no time to waste, Grandmother Silk sent forth chambers of well-armed bugs from the citadel, all bound to her will by the silk in their shells, to capture these part weavers and bring them back to her lair where they were utterly consumed, leaving behind no trace. Ever she searched for these distant glimmers of silk, her gaze sweeping over lands both near and far, until finally, like a silk fly shining in darkness, she found one that glowed far brighter than the rest. A rare half-weaver, child of spider and worm, last of her line but sensed strong with silk. Eager to claim this great prize, Grandmother Silk sent a full chamber of choirbugs to Hallownest, where Hornet was overwhelmed by their numbers and taken captive, imprisoned in a cage of powerful binding runes. Unable to break free, she could only watch helplessly as her captors made the long trek back to Pharloom, where her fate likely would have been the same as all the others, if it had not been for Lace. As the procession of choirbugs crossed over the great chasm dividing the blasted steps from Shellwood, she sent a single shimmering silk fly to land upon the cage, breaking the seal placed upon it and triggering a veritable explosion of pent-up silk from within Hornet herself, which shattered the bridge and sent everyone careening into the depths below. To be clear, it is never explicitly revealed that Lace interfered in this way, but all signs point to her being responsible. As we see at the deep docks, Lace is seemingly able to influence the flies by waving her pin like a conductor's wand, and in this very conversation she references Hornet falling from her cage as though she had been there to watch it happen. Furthermore, if you manage to skip this encounter altogether, Lace can instead be found sitting on the broken bridge itself. Taken altogether, these details paint a pretty clear picture of what happened that makes a lot of sense considering everything we know about Lace's character. Like Hornet, she was born of a sleeping mother in a dying kingdom, but did not have the fortune of being raised by a surrogate. She was truly alone, lacking purpose and direction, left to wander the fading lands of Pharloom in a contrived state of arrested development. Perhaps unsurprisingly, she soon became bitter, resenting her own existence as well as the one responsible for it. Why had Mother Silk brought her into this world only to abandon her, Lace must have asked. Why was she sealed away in a cocoon just beyond her reach? And why did she seem to care so much about these children from other lands, enough to mobilize the entire citadel in their reclamation? To be fair, all of these are valid questions, and the first one is especially tricky to answer even now. Why was Lace ignored by Grandmother Silk, despite being everything that she had wanted her to be? Even in slumber, the monarch seems to be quite capable of interacting with the bugs of Pharloom, sending them off to distant lands with specific orders, so her lack of communication with Lace is quite odd indeed. Regardless, let's continue on with the story. Desperate for her mother's attention and approval, yet deeply resentful of her at the same time and wishing to cause her pain, Lace saw in Hornet an opportunity to satisfy both desires. By setting her free, she was not only sabotaging Grandmother Silk's plan and denying her the half-weaver Silk, but also creating an opportunity to prove herself. If she could slay this favored child from another land, then perhaps she would gain that favor for herself. And that is exactly what Lace tries to do. She first engages Hornet at the Deep Docks, as previously mentioned, but this is more a quick test of strength and a chance to tease her prey than anything else. When Hornet finally ascends to the base of the cradle, however, Lace is ready to kill. Though she says nothing, her Needolin dialogue betrays her thoughts. Why her, mother? See me, your knight. See me, your daughter. In Lace's mind, this was her best and final chance at proving her worth and earning her mother's devotion, which makes it all the more tragic that she fails miserably. Her empty husk is torn by the swift sting of Hornet's needle, and as Lace collapses into the field of white flowers beneath her, she resigns herself to her fate. Face the Holy Mother who would fashion so cruel and crude a daughter as me, she says. After all, it's you that she wants, is it not? This brings us to the first ending of Silksong, in which Hornet climbs her way to the top of the cradle, defeats Grandmother Silk, and takes her place as a great and terrible Weaver Queen, covering the whole land in silk and ushering in a new cycle of control, suffering, and death. In more ways than one, this is the easiest ending to achieve. Not only does it have the simplest requirement of just beating Grandmother Silk, but Hornet explains that a part of her desires this very outcome. Dominance, she says, is baked deep in her blood. It is only by actively resisting this primal urge that another path appears, one that benefits not just Hornet herself, but all of Pharloom. When she first begins her pilgrimage from the depths of Bone Bottom, Hornet is predominantly driven by her own self-interest, granting wishes only for the material reward, but over time she begins to empathize with the common bugs around her and takes action to aid and protect them. By caring for the denizens of Pharloom in this way and becoming a part of their community, she is able to bridle the pale tendencies within her and seek not dominion, but harmony, and in so doing attracts the attention of the snail shamans. They too wish for a mutually beneficial outcome to their kingdom's plight, and with Hornet's aid manage to build a special trap that can ensnare even a god. Or at least, so they hope. As before, Hornet ascends to the cradle and defeats Grandmother Silk, plunging her needle into the monarch's shell, but instead of consuming her power, she swiftly triggers the shaman's trap, realizing too late that it is a portal directly into the abyss itself. Thick tendrils of void leap from this tear in reality, reaching eagerly for their pale prey, and as Grandmother Silk is dragged in, she seizes Hornet in a death grip, intending to pull her in as well. But at the last moment, Lace appears, leaping into the fray to slice off her mother's arm and send Hornet tumbling to safety, only to be swallowed by the darkness in her stead. A massive shockwave blasts through the cavern, and all goes dark. Later, when Hornet descends into the abyss herself, she has a curious interaction with Lace at the edge of the Black Lake. Though her physical form is trapped far below, a dreamlike projection of the rebellious daughter appears, casually swinging her leg over the void as she taunts Hornet once again. She reveals that her intervention above was done out of spite to deny her mother Hornet's silken strength. And with that accomplished, Lace believes she has won, rejoicing in their mutual destruction. She can thrash and waste and know her pathetic, broken child caused the mortal wound. It is a conflict far beyond anything this land has ever seen, nearly infinite silk against a truly infinite void. Submerged in the darkness, screaming, Grandmother Silk spun up a new protective cocoon, anchoring it into the bedrock above with silk lines corrupted by void, and, in the process, threatening the entirety of Pharloom. Great masses of rock quiver and fall, crushing any bug unlucky enough to be found underneath, while void seeps up from the abyss and corrupts everything it touches. And all of it was for Lace. Had she been taken alone, Grandmother Silk would have quickly surrendered herself to oblivion, knowing that she was beaten. But because her daughter was there with her, she hung on, bringing chaos and death to the lands above, willing to destroy everything to protect one broken child. At this point, nothing is stopping Hornet from leaving the kingdom, but she chooses to stay anyway, taking responsibility for her role in Pharloom's dire predicament and vowing to cut it free once and for all. To do this, Hornet determines that she must manifest the delicate Everbloom flower from her own memory with silk, knowing it to be the only thing that can repel the void long enough for her to reach the great sunken cocoon below. The snail shamans warn her that casting such a spell would require an enormous amount of power, equal to that of the monarch even, but by enlisting their aid and providing the pulsing memories of Pharloom's old hearts to use as fuel, Hornet turns this possibility into a reality. Her shell bursting with light, she pierces the veil of dreams and enters the deepest parts of her own mind. The Red Memory, home to not one, not two, but 3 mothers who raised and guided her, each one imparting something of great value. The memory begins with Hera, Hornet's biological mother. We see that the other Weavers of Deep Nest watched Hornet eagerly, encouraging the child to show her craft and prove herself more weaver than worm. In all likelihood, they were hoping that she would succeed where Ava had failed, becoming strong enough to challenge their mother back in Pharloom and restore the Weaver's rule. Though never made explicit, it is possible that this was the key motivation behind Hera's request of the Pale King, and why the Weavers all saw her trade as a bargain. But whatever her initial intentions might have been, Hera now felt quite differently, perhaps coming to recognize the cycle in which she and her kin were trapped. If she pulled Hornet into this mess, exploiting the child's natural ability for her own gain, then she was truly no better than her own mother. Instead, she took the first steps toward breaking it, telling Hornet to resist the cunning influence of her Weaver sisters and seek her own path. Only then you might see it, she instructed, another hope beyond. What makes this counsel especially poignant is the fact that Hera wouldn't be around to see her daughter's future at all. She had made a promise to dream for eternity and remained true to her word, leaving Hornet to grow up without her. The girl must have had questions about her birth mother and possibly even struggled with feelings of abandonment, but eventually came to understand and respect her great sacrifice. We do not choose our mothers or the circumstance into which we are born, Hornet tells the knight after Hera's dreamer seal is finally broken. Despite all the ills of this world, I'm thankful for the life she granted me. It's a beautiful scene, one that takes on new meaning in context of what we see here in the Red Memory. Though Hornet was so young at the time of Hera's sacrifice and cannot even recall her face anymore, she does remember this crucial piece of guidance her mother gave to her and remains determined to take the burden of the future in her stead. Next, Hornet recalls Queen Vespa, who served as a mentor. In the rich golden halls of Hallownest's hive, she trained the young spiderling in the art of combat, pushing her to become swift and strong and relentless, for she knew what awaited in Hornet's future. In time, she warned, they will come for you, those who fear your nature and those seeking to claim it. Vespa knew the price to be paid for Hornet's unique constitution and desired nothing more than to teach her how to sting before it was too late. Finally, Hornet comes face to face with the White Lady, arrayed in all her pale glory. Though she had every reason to harbor resentment over the circumstances of Hornet's birth, she instead chose to love this child as her own, and may even have raised her in the White Palace alongside the Hollow Knight. Here in the memory, she ruefully acknowledges that Hornet must think her and the Pale King uncaring and unrepentant for their role in the creation of the vessels, unable to justify the terrible cost of their wish. But surprisingly, Hornet pushes back. Breaking free of the memory's static bounds, she interfaces with the White Lady directly through dream, refuting her assumption and saying that she now understands the wish clearly. It is strength. In mind, in care, in claw. Strength enough that I may live to see a world better than our own, or to craft a world as I desire. She continues, that was the wish of my mother, of my mentor, and of you. This is the beating heart of the Red Memory. 3 different types of strength, each given to Hornet by a different mother figure. Strength in mind to think for herself, strength in claw to fight for survival, and strength in care to take responsibility for the future of her world. All 3 are needed for what lies ahead. Acknowledging the woman her daughter has become, one who has seen the darkness but ever looks to the light, the White Lady deems her ready to receive the gift she holds close, the only means we possess to resist that void with which our family is forever linked, the first light. She tells Hornet to reach forth and take it, wresting it from this remembrance, and in the shining splendor of its soft white petals, the memory fades away. But the Everbloom does not. Hornet awakens in the dark to find it resting gently on her cloak, manifested clean and pure from her own silk. Such a small, simple thing obtained at such a high cost. All 3 hearts were incinerated, utterly expended in casting the spell, and all that remains of the snail shamans are 3 empty shells. They sacrificed their own bodies as fuel even beyond the hearts, sending Hornet in as far as they could, all for the dream of one little flower. But only Hornet could be the one to pluck it. As we see, obtaining the Everbloom was only possible through self-reflection, by reconnecting with her mothers and reckoning with the complicated legacy they had left her. And in turn, this opportunity was only made possible thanks to all that she had experienced and learned in this kingdom, lessons not only of empathy, but of motherhood in all its forms, shaping her view of herself, her family, and her world. Along her journey, Hornet bore witness to mothers who callously perpetuate cycles of guilt and servitude, mothers who nurture, protect, and teach their young, mothers who will not hesitate to sacrifice yet still hold wishes of their own, and even women who step into the role of a mother for others, deeply influencing who they will someday become. She reconnected with her own Weaver heritage, searching the minds and memories of those who remained in Pharloom and binding their ancestral arts, taking upon herself the responsibility of reclaiming the future of their haunted kingdom. And in similar fashion, she ultimately agrees to bind Ava to herself as well, freeing this long-lost sister from her eternal prison and joining their shimmering souls as one. Importantly, though, not all of Hornet's experience was gained simply by observing others or absorbing their essence. I think one of the most important but easily overlooked experiences she had in the context of motherhood was with the insidious entity known as Greyroot. Earlier in her journey, in a dark, thickly knotted recess of Bilewater, Hornet pulled a crying baby from its cradle, perhaps reacting to some maternal instinct of her own. While in her pack it cries incessantly, immune to any attempts to subdue it, and after bringing this twisted bud back to Greyroot's abode in Shellwood and agreeing to participate in the rite of rebirth, the tiny creature is suddenly and forcibly injected into her shell where its parasitic nature manifests, sapping Hornet's strength and putting her body at great risk. In a very twisted, disturbing way, Hornet is forced into motherhood, carrying a child not her own, which leads to one of 2 outcomes. A secret ending in which Grandmother Silk and Hornet are both transmuted entirely into wood, their entangled husks giving birth to what is perhaps the most powerful pale parasite this world has ever seen. Or, after Yarnaby's extraction procedure, what remains of the bud becomes a part of Hornet forever, a deep imprint on her soul that expands her very nature and identity. All that is to say, by the time Hornet returns to the Lake of Void at the very foundations of Pharloom, she is no longer the same bug who first arrived in this kingdom, and her resolve in the face of such extreme opposition is so deeply earned. She now understands that the eternal curse of this kingdom is a mother's love, twisted though it may be, which means that Pharloom can only be saved when Lace is. This one, she writes in the Hunter's Journal, the dark shall not take. Even more than that, though, she has claimed the wish of her mothers, determined to free herself of their sad fate. She has the strength in mind to choose this path forward, the strength and claw to challenge the great foe who stands in her way, and the strength and care to do it for the right reason, for a dying kingdom's future. Once again, a projection of Lace appears when Hornet approaches the lake's edge, gleefully inviting her to take the final plunge. "Join us in my drowning palace," she says, "and let oblivion swallow us all." But Hornet is unmoved, replying simply, "Oblivion may take you, child. My own life I shall not sacrifice. I have survived the fury of your land. I have borne its barbs and its blades, and I have seen wonder behind its dangers. But always, child, I remain a daughter of Hallownest. And the void below all things, that darkness I will fear no longer." With a final laugh, Lace disappears, and Hornet turns back to the churning depths before her. It is time for the cycle to end. In one swift motion, she leaps into the air and dives headfirst into the void, clutching the Everbloom tightly in her claw. Again and again, the darkness strikes, attempting to snuff out its steady light, but the flower holds fast even as its petals begin to disintegrate under the pressure. Finally, Hornet reaches the great cocoon, dropping through a tiny gap at its top to find Grandmother Silk, frayed and weak, her silken soul reaching its end. It doesn't take long for Lace to appear, or at least what remains of her. She is lost, covered head to toe in thick black void and utterly consumed by its destructive power, but in the fierce battle that follows, Hornet beats it out of her blow by blow, until at last she is freed. Lifting the child gently in her arms, Hornet looks back to Grandmother Silk, and an understanding passes between them. This is it, the one and only chance Lace will have to be saved. Without hesitation, she chooses to sacrifice herself, supercharging Hornet with every last shred of her precious silk and unraveling into oblivion as the two rocket toward the surface. And thanks to the timely arrival of the night, now one with the void and in command of its power, this sacrifice proves to not be in vain. To some extent, I think we can sympathize with Grandmother Silk. She willingly shared her divinity with others, granting common bugs brilliant minds and silk-producing souls only to be betrayed by them and isolated in a place they called the Cradle, as though she were a baby, subjected to an eternal lullaby as those traitorous daughters harvested her precious silk for their own glory. After an age trapped in this web, it seems little wonder that upon beginning to reawaken, she lashes out with her cursed thread, desperate to regain control over everyone and everything. Bind them all, her thoughts read in the unraveled silk heart. One mind, one union. Raise them up. Bind their souls, their memory, their voices, their song. Bind their shells. They are ours, bound forever. And that is exactly what she does, pulling nearly the entire kingdom into her thrall. But this raises an important question. Why didn't she just throw out her web like this at the very start and save herself a whole lot of trouble? Sure, the silk infusion experiments made it easier, but I think the bigger reason ties back to the complicated relationship pale beings have with control. For all their magnificence and glory, at the end of the day, pale beings are still creatures with emotions, dreams, and most importantly, the need for connection. They want to be worshipped by legions of devoted disciples, but at the same time, they also yearn for family. Silk chose to call the weavers her daughters, not her servants, after all, and the final reason she gives for Lace's creation is especially revealing. One to wish our waking. She simply wanted to be wanted. As a result of this innate, deep-seated desire, the pale gods of this world are not opposed to free will. In fact, they prefer and encourage it. What they are opposed to is bugs using their free will to choose something or someone other than them, and so help those who choose such a path. Devotion or destruction, Hornet tells the Green Prince. These are the only fates my kind allow. But always, devotion comes first. As we see, both Grandmother Silk and the Radiants have the power to create a hive mind spanning an entire kingdom, but both only resort to this after they have been betrayed by their children, when devotion has failed. And crucially, it doesn't make either of them happy. After being forsaken by Hallownest's moth tribe, who are said to be born from her light, the Radiants forced her way into the dreams of bugs all across the kingdom and caused the infection, a hive mind dripping with rage and vengeance, reducing its victims to their base instincts and driving them to kill all those who remained free. In contrast, the hive mind produced by Grandmother Silk through the haunting is defined by a very different emotion. When Hornet asks Pavo what he remembers of his time caught upon the thread, he recalls only sorrow. Strange, sad memories, not my own, and my own thoughts smothered amidst the tangle. Grandmother Silk was miserable, ruminating over her painful memories of betrayal and loss, and it was a misery of her own making. For all her genuine desire to be a mother herself, Grandmother Silk's fatal flaw was her inability to understand that the joy of motherhood is found in seeing your children grow and forge their own path in the world, just as Huntress spoke about. Watching their first flight, their first hunt, passing them the torch of tradition to carry into the future. Instead, she did the exact opposite, binding her daughters, suffocating them, constricting their growth. She wanted to make certain that they chose her by limiting their options, perhaps terrified that, if left to their own devices, they wouldn't. But this turned out to be a self-fulfilling prophecy. In forcing them to choose her, she missed the entire point of becoming a mother at all and ultimately lost their affection forever. So then, if the joy of motherhood is to be found in the self-actualization of one's children, it follows that the great agony of motherhood is simply letting go, stepping back and allowing this growth to happen. It is to give so very much and get so little in return, to sacrifice time, health, and energy only to be dismissed, disregarded, or even betrayed outright. It is to suffer the vulnerability of putting a piece of yourself into the world, not knowing who they will become or what they will do. They might choose to love and support you, or they might not. They may worship as you taught them, or they may choose another path. The pain of dissent is real and raw and maybe forever, but the alternative is worse. Because Grandmother Silk never embraced the agony of motherhood, she never found the joy in it either, and instead just ended up frustrated and sad in a great web of sorrow, unaware what she had done wrong. But in the end, I do think she learns this lesson. In the Hunter's Journal entry for Moss Mother, encountered in the opening hour of the game, we read that motherhood is an instinct that can push creatures beyond what seems their natural limits, a subtle foreshadowing of the great struggle to come in Act 3. When pushed to her absolute limit, trapped in a black lake of oblivion, this mother finds that the strength beyond her silk is empathy. Faced with her own excruciating mortality, she realizes that what she wants more than anything else is for Lace to live. Like Hera did with Hornet, like Huntress did with her brood, she is able to foresee a future in which her daughter lives on without her and choose it, giving her all to make it a reality. She had always loved her children, but for the first time she is able to separate this love from her own vanity and see her precious daughter as an individual, a being of limitless potential, with a future as bright as her polished gold pin. And now we come to the end of this video, and the end of a truly incredible story. After experiencing Hornet's long journey through Pharloom myself and achieving that final, profound ending, I just couldn't stop thinking about it, and figured that the best way to better understand the story myself was to retell it in the context of what is, at least in my mind, its most important theme. I sincerely hope that in some small way I was able to do it justice, and that you were able to enjoy the video even if you may not agree with all of my conclusions. At the end of the day, these are nothing more than my own personal thoughts on a very complex and sensitive theme, not to mention the opinions of someone who is not a mother. Though like I said at the beginning, I do think that many of these ideas apply to fatherhood as well. Anyways, if you did enjoy the video, then be sure to hit the like button, let me know your own thoughts and perspectives in the comments below, and maybe even consider subscribing to the channel if you'd like to see more content like this. I make lore and theory videos for a decent spread of games, and may spend a bit more time covering Silksong as well, we'll see. As always, thank you so much for watching, and I hope to see you in the next one.